Hello again. US politicians have underwhelmed in recent years. They botched together a fiscal cliff deal, and now we're back to wondering whether they're going to raise the debt ceiling or will the government simply run out of money.
Now, the other congressionally imposed deadline coming up is the so-called debt ceiling, something most Americans hadn't even heard of before 2 years ago. So I want to be clear about this. The debt ceiling is not a question of authorizing more spending. Raising the debt ceiling does not authorize more spending. It simply allows the country to pay for spending that Congress has already committed to. These are bills that have already been racked up, and we need to pay them. So while I'm willing to compromise and find common ground over how to reduce our deficits, America cannot afford another debate with this Congress about whether or not they should pay the bills they've already racked up.
President Barack Obama clearly isn't happy with Congress, and I've been to speak to US politics expert Professor Rob Singh. This Congress has been described as the worst ever in the Washington Post. Is that a view you would share?
I'm not entirely sure. I think it's been the most unproductive since 1947, just in terms of the volume of legislation that's gone through. Having said that, you know, there are genuine political differences between the two parties, and in that sense, I think it's a reflection of that kind of basic opposition between Democrats and Republicans, and in a sense, one can't really fault them for standing on principle there.
But are they reflective of the general population, or is it their own dogma?
I think they're reflective of their two distinct bases, and I think that's where the difficulty comes in terms of compromise, that you've got a Republican base that's so hostile to tax rises of any sort, and you've got a Democratic Party base that's so hostile to any kind of proposals for serious cuts in social spending and entitlements, that it's incredibly difficult for the two sides to come together.
This Congress is coming to the end of its life. Are there any signs that the next one will be any more productive?
I don't think so, because if anything, what you found is that the more moderate blue dog Democrats have kind of disappeared through the last two election cycles. So the Democrats have, if anything, shifted somewhat to the left, and at the same time the Tea Party influence on the Republican Party has taken them somewhat to the right. So if anything, the two parties are further apart than they were in the last Congress, which makes the prospects for really any kind of serious compromise, I think, even more distant.
But in terms of the debt ceiling and also the fiscal cliff, isn't the emphasis more on the Republicans to compromise, as we did see in Obama victory, and also the Democrats still hold the majority in the Senate?
In a sense, I think there's some mileage in that, but on the other hand, the fact of the matter is the Republicans did increase their majority in the House, and to the extent that the real driver of the debt is really entitlement spending, the onus has to be at least equally on the Democrats to propose some kind of reforms to Social Security, Medicare at least. So it's not just the Republicans. I think there is a sort of co-responsibility for what's happening on the Hill.
It seems strange from a European point of view to watch the negotiations in the US, because you have the President Barack Obama, telling Congress what to do, but at the same time he can't directly influence what they actually do on Capitol Hill. So do you think there's a lack of leadership within Congress?
I'm not sure there's a lack of leadership. I think there's a great deal of hostility. I mean, probably more hostility between the White House and Congress than we've seen in decades. And I think that Obama, by taking up a fairly provocative and aggressive stance towards the Hill, isn't helping himself, because second-term presidents have very limited political capital to begin with, and that dissipates within a matter of months. So I think there are genuine differences of principle, genuine differences of ideology, and one of the questions is whether Obama can learn the lessons of his first term, when he simply basically gave up on trying to persuade Congress and instead dictating to them. And I think if he carries on the way that he seems to be embarking on the second term, he's only storing up more difficulties for himself in trying to bring enough Republicans along to deal with the deficit and the debt.
But what can he actually do? Because as it's a presidential system, so what, does he actually back away, or should he be more forthright?
Well, I'm not entirely sure it is a presidential system. Congress is still co-equal with the White House, and there's limited leverage that Obama can exert. After all, he was only re-elected with 51% of the vote. It wasn't a landslide by any means, and he essentially ran on an agenda which was effectively negative, really targeted against Romney rather than proposing positive things himself. So I think there has to be compromise from both sides, and simply demanding of the Republicans that they essentially unilaterally surrender to the White House is not a winning strategy for Obama.
You just mentioned it earlier, but the Republican Party is really vehemently against tax hikes. Is that just in their fibre?
There's an element of that, in the sense that the late Robert Novak said that Republicans were put on earth to cut taxes, and that's been there really since Reagan. There's an additional element, though, in the sense that Grover Norquist and other groups that fund campaigns to a large extent have made it a litmus test of Republican orthodoxy. And given that most Republicans now don't face serious democratic challenges in a general election, the only competitive challenges they face is going to come in a primary election, it's difficult for a lot of Republicans, especially in the House, to renege on the pledge not to vote to raise taxes.
Yeah, but there's two big economic issues facing the US at the moment, the debt ceiling and also the fiscal cliff still hasn't been solved. So the debt ceiling is probably the problem that needs sorting out first. Do you expect it to be raised?
I really think at the current stage the prospects are 50-50. I think at the moment the Republicans in the House at least are willing to go to the mat and are willing to actually see government shut down, even the sequester come through, in order to get the Democrats to move on spending cuts. So I think the prospects are very much 50-50, and to the extent that Obama is himself pursuing something of a brinkmanship game, the stakes are getting higher and higher day by day, and in a sense it's difficult to see in that process how either side compromises without losing substantial political capital.
And also the fiscal cliff, the term everyone's using is the can's been kicked down the road.
Yes.
That's used in many contexts now. Do you think that the fiscal cliff will see a solution, a proper solution?
I don't think so for the foreseeable future. I think at the moment it's more kicking the can down the road even further before they can actually get to a stage where they can compromise, because I think the incentives simply aren't there for either side to try and run against their own base. And in that sense at the moment we're just in for more and more gridlock, I suspect, for at least another 6 months.
I'm thinking this is economically and politically this is going to be a disaster for the US, isn't it? Because already politicians are held in very low esteem.
Absolutely. I mean, the last Congress had about 10% approval rating among the American people as a whole, and that kind of mistrust of government, cynicism towards politics is just deepening week by week. I think the only saving grace potentially is if the financial markets are spooked sufficiently that they can bring enough pressure to bear on both parties, but the Republicans in particular, to shift at least some kind of incremental way. But again, whether and when that happens is probably a matter of months rather than weeks at the moment.
Well, we'll keep on top of that story here on Dukascopy TV, but for the moment, goodbye.